Hey, beer appreciators, Sweaty Crab. Welcome to Beer Times Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. For today's session, for today's session, we're gonna have a good burp about what does the brewing of macro scale lager bring to the microbrewery table topics. This may sound a bit weird, but just wait until the end of the session before you start judging anything, okay? All right, all right. So, when I say macro scale, I do mean those super duper large brewery, big production with the factory vibe. And for the micro one, let's best to think about small to mid scale breweries like 1 to 10, 15 barrels brew house. Anyhow, I mean, if you really think about it, both brewery scales actually has the same function, the same job, which is of course to brew beer, right? And in general, for the macro camp, it is kind of known for producing one particular style of beer, which is light lager. And for the other camp, the micro one, you can expect like a broad array of a beer styles from those type of breweries, right? At this point, let's assume that the brewers from macro scale world may want to step his or her foot into the micro scale one or vice versa. And I think it is very interesting to hear about their experience, their stories about the move that they made. Now, our guest speaker for today's session did it all. I mean, from both ends, right? So it's going to be crazily interesting. And before we hear about his story, without further ado, let me introduce him to all of us first. So he graduated from UC Davis, I mean University of Davis in 1984 in a fermentation science degree. And after his graduation, he ended up working in a winery in Hollister, the Central Coast region of California, for about 8 years. Even though he was enjoying the winery life, he knew that his path is in beer and brewing lens. So about halfway in, he started moonlighting as a brewer, working in a small brew pub, brewing all sorts of those sessionable ales for the San Andres Brewing Company in the same town. Um, then in 1992, things get serious in his end. So to intensify his passion for making beer brewing as a career, he made a bold move by joining Anheuser-Busch, which is the land of Budweiser and Bud Light, which is where he rafted this Anheuser-Busch River for about 14 years and cutting his teeth in various roles of brewing and various facilities in Anheuser-Busch. Eventually, in 2006, his path came full circle. He was hired by one of the most apparent personality brewery in San Diego at that time as the brewmaster, and the brewery name is Stone Brewing Company. There, he and his team were rocking and rolling tons of great beers introduced to the world. After 10 years at Stone, in 2016, instead of choosing a retirement path, he decided to join a new team to start up a new brewery from the ground up named New Realm Brewing Company, which is where he's overseeing all of the brewing activities to this day. So please welcome our guest speaker, Mitch Steele. Hello,
Hello.
Mitch. How
Hi,
you
how are
doing?
you? I'm great, thank you.
I'm doing great, and it's wonderful to have
Good.
you on. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
It is a pleasure. So you are live from your hometown now, right? Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia right now.
Okay, cool, cool. And I understand that this past few weeks has been like a head spinning week for you. You've been traveling a lot and preparing for the the opening of the new location for New Realm, right?
That's
All right.
correct. Yeah, our fifth location, I spent the last 3 weeks doing staff training and being there for soft openings. We had a grand opening last Thursday, so it's been a very busy stretch. And before that, I was traveling all over for industry events and such. So yeah, it's been busy.
Of course, of course. And that new location, is that the fifth location over the past 7 years for New Realm, right?
It is our fifth location. Our our first location was Atlanta, Georgia, where I live and where I work. And then we took over a brewery that had been closed in Virginia on the coast, in Virginia Beach. And a few years ago, we took over a brew pub where the owner wanted to sell the brew pub. And that was near Charleston, South Carolina.
Right.
And then last year, we opened up a tap room on the campus of Auburn University. And Auburn University has a brewing science program, a master's degree program. So we're helping out with that. And then the Greenville project actually has been going on for about 3 years. It's taken us 3 years, but we finally got open last week. So, yeah, we have 5 locations in the southeast of the United States, and we've got a couple more in the works. So we're very busy.
Right. First of all, I have to say, congratulations for the 5th locations.
Thank you.
It's been a long work for you guys, and it just opened up. All right. So before we dive into today's topic, I think I want to touch a bit about New Realm Brewing Company first, because I find that it is very interesting and fascinating at the same time to witness the growth and the brewing path that you guys walk down the road. And first of all, I heard that at New Realm you guys have a solid rule for where your beer will be sold. Can you share the concept with us?
Yeah, when we started, we tried to come up with a business plan that we thought made sense for the time, and this was back 2016. And what we were seeing in the United States was the large brewers that were trying to sell their beer nationally across the whole country were really struggling in areas where they didn't have a brewing facility. And the reason was that there were so many breweries opening and so much good beer being made locally, and people in these areas would preferentially drink the beer from their local brewers, which is a great thing. But it made it tough for the bigger brewers, the bigger craft brewers. And so when we decided to start New Realm Brewing Company, we made a rule that we haven't changed in the 6+ years we've been open, that we're not going to sell our beer in an area where we don't have a brewery and a restaurant tap room on the ground. And the reason is that we want to sell our beer in areas where we have a presence, that we have people, that we can support the community and be part of the local community. So that's very important to us. So we've made that rule. And so if you look at the Southeast United States, we're not in North Carolina, we're not in Tennessee, we're not in Florida, because we don't have sites there. And so it's been an important part of who we are.
Great. I mean, it's like just to make sure that you are able to first have a fully control of your production, and just make sure that you have people, well-trained staff to nurture the beer itself and also the business, right?
Yeah, and that's a very important part of it as well. Just being able to have our eyes on our beer and where it's served, and talk to the people that are serving it, and go out to events at those places and make sure that it's being treated well, and that it's kept cold all the time, and those kind of things.
Right. Awesome. And you were saying that there are more to come for the new location, and the 6th location is underway, correct?
Yeah, it's going to be in Virginia as well. It's fairly close to our Virginia Beach location, but the owners of the building in our Virginia Beach location are building a complex. I want to say it's 25 miles away, and they asked us to be a tenant there, and we agreed because we have a great relationship with them.
All right, cool. So I'm going to pull up one photo just to sum up all the 5 locations that you guys have. And can you just walk us briefly through each of them? Just, the brew house type and the concept of each one.
Yeah, so I'll start with Atlanta. That's our original location. We opened in very late 2017. This was going to be our main brewery for several years, and we've got a 25 hectoliter Krohn Steinecker brew house in there, and we also have a 5-barrel SS Brewtech pilot system in there. Over the years, as we've gotten into some of these other locations, Atlanta has evolved into more of an innovation facility. We do all of our innovation work in Atlanta. We also do any beers that are only served in our tap rooms and don't go out into distribution and into stores. Those typically get brewed in Atlanta as well. So that's our oldest and original brewery. We took over the Virginia Beach Brewery in 2018 when we realized that we were going to be out of space in Atlanta in a couple of years, and we were starting to talk about building a production facility or another brewery. And those are 3 to 4 year projects. And when this one came on the market, it was an amazing deal financially. It was a lot bigger than what we needed at the time, but it was such a good deal. And it was close enough to where we wanted our breweries to be that we went for it. And Virginia Beach has evolved. It's a 50-barrel Mueller brew house. We've got 250 barrel fermenters in there. It's probably pushing 100,000 barrels of overall capacity, whereas the capacity in Atlanta is more like 12,000 barrels. So it's a much bigger facility, much bigger brewery. And as such, that's where most of our production happens. And anything that's in a wrapped carton in cans typically comes from Virginia Beach.
Got it.
Then a few years ago, there was a brew pub on Daniel Island, just north of the city of Charleston, and it's a new community there. And there was a person running a brew pub who wanted to get rid of the business, and we took it over, and it was our third location. It's a 7-barrel brew house. We have a brewer there. His name is Jeff, and he brews a lot of great beers there. And it's essentially a brew pub, and a little bit of his beer goes into distribution and gets out into bars in the Charleston area, but not a lot. But it's also, and the one thing that I'll say is all 3 of these facilities have full restaurants and outdoor areas for seating and for music and things like that. We got into a partnership with the faculty at Auburn University, which is just over the Georgia border in Alabama. So it's about 2 hours southwest of Atlanta. And we started working with them because they have a brewing science program, and we started trying to help them out with their classes and recording some classwork and things like that with them. And they were building a brewery, and as we talked, it made sense for us to come in and run the brewery. It's a 7-barrel Deutsche system. Deutsche is out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's a beautiful little brewery. It's a 1-person operation. Drew runs the brewery and also runs the tap room, but it's right in the heart of the hospitality area of the hospitality training area of Auburn University, and it's the only site we have that doesn't have a full restaurant on it, just because there wasn't space, but there is plenty of food around. And so people can come and enjoy our beers and get food there. And then Greenville is the last one, which just opened last week. When we started, we wanted to do sour beers, and we had a couple of projects that didn't work out. The Greenville building is interesting because unlike the other buildings, it's an historic building. It's well over 100 years old. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of wood in it, and we decided to make that our wood aging blendery type facility. And so we've got fooders in there, we've got barrels in there. We're going to be doing any beer that we make out of Greenville is going to be aged in wood for some period of time. And it's kind of cool because the other breweries, we didn't want to bring in mixed fermentations into those. We just weren't convinced we'd be able to keep it clean and keep it out of our regular beers. So this gives us the opportunity to finally do some of those styles of beers, like a Flanders or maybe an Orval or a Brett finished type beer or something like that. So we're working on that right now. We just got our alcohol license a couple of weeks ago, so we're still kind of we're still putting together the plans for this, but we're very excited about it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sounds like the Greenville is going to be the the fun place to just cooking some interesting stuff out of there.
It is between that and Atlanta and Charleston, we're going to have a wide range of beers coming. We're doing a lot of fun things.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you. And the Greenville one, when I looking at the photos, the brick house is so beautiful. The building that you guys just build the breweries in. I think above all of this, 5 locations and more to come, and you are overseeing all of this brewing related activities of all these places, which is kind of insane in my opinion. And I bet that the experience from both at Stone and at Anheuser-Busch plays somewhat fruitful role in your day-to-day operation at New Rim, to current day. So I think it is a good place to just cut the ribbon and start to the topic for today's session. Okay, so Mitch, let's look back when you were moonlighting as a brewer for San Andres Brewing Company. At that time, what drove you to enter this macro scale lager brewing at Anheuser-Busch? What's the motivation behind that?
Behind joining Anheuser-Busch from San Andreas?
Yes.
Well, so I had high hopes for San Andreas, but we were in a very small town. We didn't generate enough business for me to be there full time and have a career there. I think one of the things that happened, and it's kind of an interesting story, is the owner, when he started the company, wanted me to be the full-time person on site. And then he had another job. He was working in a tomato cannery in the town. And when they found out he was opening the brewery, they fired him. And so he had no choice. He had to work in the brewery. So I still wanted to do it. But, I realized pretty early on it was never going to be, like a career where I actually made a decent living off of it. And that wasn't going to happen. But I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot in those first 4 years. But, after 4 years, I didn't want to work in the winery anymore, and I wanted to really focus on brewing as a career. And where I went to university, the University of California, Davis, they had strong ties with Anheuser-Busch, and they fed a lot of their graduates of the brewing science program went on to great careers at Anheuser-Busch. So I figured I'd apply to a few Anheuser-Busch breweries and see what happened, and I ended up getting hired in Fort Collins, Colorado, as a brewing supervisor. And my goal at the time was to spend 5 years or so with Anheuser-Busch, learn as much as I could, and then get back out into the craft business. And it ended up lasting a bit longer than that.
So that's the plan, right? And so just curious, were there any other breweries that you applied a job for at that time besides from Anheuser-Busch?
Yeah, there were several. I was talking with people in Colorado and the East Coast. There were a couple of Anheuser-Busch breweries I talked to. Yeah, so there were probably half a dozen that I interviewed with, and it didn't work out for one reason or another. Maybe it was my choice. I didn't want to move to a place that was very cold or really hot, and those kind of things played into it. And then but once I saw the Fort Collins brewery in Colorado, I really fell in love with Colorado itself and thought this would be an interesting change for me.
Right. So you then moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, and in around 1992 to start a job as you mentioned the brewing supervisor, right?
Yes. I was a shift supervisor, so that all the brewing at Anheuser-Busch is done by union brewers, and I was on the management team. So I was not allowed to touch anything, but I was allowed to work the schedule and supervise the team and make sure that things got done in the schedule that they were supposed to get done. The beer quality was being managed by us on the floor. It was a fun job, but yeah.
So that is kind of a managing role, right? Not operation.
It was a managing role. It was a supervisory role.
All right. Got it. And so let's take the step a bit to the first one for this. Like, how was it like? I mean, how different was it when you compare it at your time at San Andres?
Well, San Andreas was very small. We had a 14-barrel brew house, 2-vessel brew house. We had 6 fermenters. It was a 1.5 person operation essentially. The Anheuser-Busch brewery. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I want to say that the brew length there was 700 barrels plus,
Oh,
so it was huge, and they were mashing in, you know,
like crazy.
yeah, 24 brews a day, something like that. So, I mean, it was around a 7-day a week, 24 hours a day operation there. And we were rotating shifts as supervisors, and we worked holidays and weekends and everything else. Yeah, it just never shut down. Versus a little brew pub where you come in and say, well, I think I'm going to brew on Friday, and that's it, and that's what you do, and you do other things during the rest of the week. So it was, the scale was huge. It was closer to the winery I was working at in scope, and the winery wasn't anywhere near as big as that Anheuser-Busch brewery, but the winery was also a union crew that was making the wine, and I was an assistant winemaker, and so my job was a supervisory, planning, scheduling, execution job, and getting the team there to make the wine the way we wanted it made, and in the time frame we wanted it made. And Anheuser-Busch was similar in that respect. So I think, when they interviewed me, the fact that I had 8 years of supervisory experience with a union, I think played a big part in me getting that job.
All right, got it. And did it take you a lot of time to adjust to the new environment and the new working culture?
Oh, it did. It took many months. I think, number one, they had a great training program set up for me. So the first month, all I did was I shadowed another supervisor for the first 30 days. And, as time went on, after a couple of weeks, he started letting me run the shift, and he shadowed me to make sure I was doing it right. So I had great training there, and I'm really appreciative to that. I worked with some people that were excellent at telling me how to do things. But, the one thing about Anheuser-Busch is a very German, at the time, and it was a very German oriented brewery. So a lot of the brewing language that they used for the processes, for the tanks and things like that, were German. And I was not familiar with that. And I had to learn that language. It's the training at UC Davis and the brew pubs in the United States in the 1980s all were very English oriented, and so that the language for your kettle and your whirlpool and your fermenters and transferring from tank to tank is different using English brewing terminology versus using German brewing terminology. And so I had to learn that. Also, it was a much bigger company with many more layers of management, which was a lot different than what I was used to. So, as a supervisor, you're at the ground level, and then there's an area manager above you, and then assistant brewmasters, and then the head brewmaster. And then the head brewmaster reported to a brewing director in St. Louis, who reported to the vice president of brewing, who reported to August Busch III, the CEO. So, I mean, there were so many layers of management, and I was at the bottom rung. And so, you just put your head down and did your job and asked a lot of questions, and you'd be okay, and there were a lot of people there who could answer questions for you. From that standpoint, it was great. I was able to work with a lot of people that were very skilled at running breweries and managing breweries, and it was very helpful.
And so, yeah, so those layers, those hierarchy is kind of more in the corporate side in, all those big companies. But I bet that that training resource is going to be solid, right, for Anheuser-Busch.
Oh, it was, and I learned a tremendous amount. I learned so much at Anheuser-Busch. 14 years at Anheuser-Busch, I learned more than I have in any other role that I've had.
Right. Got it. And you say that they brew like 24/7, mash like, I don't know, 24 turns a day, and you have to manage all that. Wasn't it that hectic, trying to, managing all of this? But is it like that difficult, or you can find a groove to ride along with it?
Yeah, so at the time when I joined, they had three different departments in the brewery. So they separated it into three pieces. So one person ran the brew house, one person ran the fermenting cellar, and one
Oh,
person ran the finishing cellar, or where the bright beer was produced.
right.
So I started off in the fermentation cellar, and so there were two other supervisors on shift with me all the time. And so and to be effective in that job, it was really important to establish a routine, so you didn't forget things. And that was one
Mhm.
thing that was drilled into me by the people that were training me, is if you have a routine and you know where you're going to be at different times during the day, you're not going to forget anything. And then if something happened, like there was a problem, a production issue, a maintenance issue, some other type of issue that you had to deal with, it pulled you away from your normal routine. It was easier to step back into it and make sure you got everything done. And the most important thing as a supervisor that you could do during the day was make sure the person who came in after you the next shift was set up to succeed and
Okay.
had a plan, and because a big part of that job was planning the next shift. And if you didn't do a good job of that, then that person had a horrible shift as well. And that was a very bad thing.
Right. Very bad thing to happen to one,
Y-
the other
yep.
shift.
Yep.
Okay. So before we move to the next part of your AB journey or Anheuser-Busch, let's have a glance look at the Fort Collins facilities just to make sure. Just want to know that is it still the same as what you remember?
So it's a bit different. I believe that brew house shot up top is an expansion that happened after I left, but
Okay.
uh, underneath the brew house is the main fermenting cellar, and they had conical fermenters with catwalks, and
Right.
that looks pretty much the same. So yeah, everything else looks pretty much the same, but they've gone through some expansions and some capital projects, a lot of
Hmm.
them since I left, because I left 30 years ago.
Right.
So it's undergone a lot of changes, but I bet I could still find my way around.
And that fermentation cellar is where you were managing at that time, right? Sort
That's
of.
correct.
Okay. This is huge, but yeah. So you spent times there at Fort Collins, and just curious, like what beers were produced or brewed mostly there at this Fort Collins location?
Well, obviously it was, and all the breweries did the same. It was a lot of
Oh,
Budweiser and a lot of Bud Light. We did Michelob there. We did Busch Natural Light. We made O'Doul's non-alcoholic there.
oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, so there were probably 10 different brands that were brewed at any given time.
But mostly Bud and Bud Light is
Yes,
the flagship. Okay,
yes.
okay, got it. All right, let's continue the journey. So after Fort Collins, there are two more of the main AB facilities that you spend the time, I mean, most of your time working at, and it is at St. Louis, Missouri, and Merrimack, New Hampshire. So let's
Mhm.
talk about them in order. Start with St. Louis first. What moved you to St. Louis? And I think in around 1995, right?
Yeah, it was 1995. I was promoted and put in charge of new product development for Anheuser-Busch.
Hmm.
I was in corporate brewing. I wasn't working in a brewery at that time. So I was in the corporate offices, which are right across the street from the main brewery. And I did new product development for Anheuser-Busch for almost 4 years. And we were at the time trying to come out with some craft beer styles. We did a beer called Elk Mountain. We did Michelob Amber Bock. We did a whole series of Michelob beers, Pale Ale, a Pilsner. There were a porter. There were a lot of them that I worked on, and it was a very interesting time. And that was an interesting period, because working in corporate brewing, you're working with some very high powered, high level people
Hmm.
who were great. Honestly, they wanted you to do well. They didn't want you to see you fail. They helped you every step of the way, learn how you had to do things to succeed at that company. And one of the greatest things about working in the corporate brewing offices were there were a number of German trained brewmasters who had been brewing for 20, 30, 40 years who worked there. And they were always happy to answer questions if you had questions, and you had to ask smart questions, but they were a huge help. And a wonderful resource for me as I was learning not only how Anheuser-Busch worked as a brewery, but also how to deal with the people side of it, the politics of a corporate thing like Anheuser-Busch. So I did that for the first 4 years I was in St. Louis. And then after that, I went back into the brewery in the St. Louis brewery and ran the brew house there for a couple of years.
Okay. So when you were in that innovation group, like new product development, do you actually like brew a small scale by yourself, or you have team to do it for you?
We had a team do it. We were kind of the traffic directors.
Okay.
We had there was a pilot brewery in St. Louis that was a 10-barrel system, and they brewed I believe they brewed 10 brews a week on that system, and most of them were hop trials and other ingredient trials and things like that. We had one slot a week to brew, and if we used it or we lost it, and so we would send beer recipes over to the pilot brewery. We worked very closely with the manager of the pilot brewery and got beers brewed, and then we were able to go over there and be there on brew day and taste the beer and evaluate the beer through fermentation and the whole bit. So we were in the brewery a lot, but we weren't actually doing the brewing.
Okay, got it. It's about planning, coming up with new interesting beers that probably gonna being used in whatever projects that you guys were interested in at that moment.
That's correct. And most of the ideas came from our marketing department, not the brewing department. So the marketing department said, we would like you guys to brew, say, a pumpkin beer. And then we would have to put together the recipe, get the trials brewed, evaluate it, pass it through our sensory panels, get the approval from the brewing managers, and then send it up through marketing and sales and everybody else who needed to say okay. So yeah, it was a pretty stressful process.
Okay, I can feel that. I mean, and do you recall like the most innovative beer that you ever brew there for the new product development? Is there anything like crazy that you can share, or?
Oh, we did a couple. I mean, we brewed Anheuser-Busch's first IPA there. That was fun. We brewed a Scotch ale that was about 8% alcohol. That was a favorite of August Busch III, and we brewed it several times trying to get that one out the door and get the marketing team to go for it, and they never did. We did a beer with honey and rye malt. And it was a German Rogen beer, so we called it Honey Heferogen, and the marketing team couldn't pronounce it, and so they said, no, we're not doing this. But as far as beers that actually made it out the door, I think one of the beers was called Elk Mountain Harvest Ale, and it was the first beer I was ever aware of in recent memory that used fresh hops in it. Wow. And Anheuser-Busch had a hop farm up in northern Idaho near the Canada border. And we got hops from that farm and they weren't kilned. And we brewed with them and made this beer. And honestly, I don't know if anybody on the craft side had ever done a fresh hop beer like that before we did. That was 1996, I believe. And we did a beer that had tequila in it, and we did some of those kind of things. And, once the new product stuff started going down the road of flavored beers, that's when I asked to get back out into a brewery and run a brewery. So that's how I got transferred.
Got it. But it seems like you were having a lot of fun time there too, trying to brew new things and see how people respond, how it was received.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. And actually, in St. Louis, which is, the headquarters of Anheuser-Busch, trying to
Mhm.
get people on board with pale ales and other, beers that have a lot of hop presence and things like that was a
Right.
challenge. But it was a lot of fun. And I certainly learned a lot. And I say this, this is in the mid 1990s. That was when the internet was really just getting started,
Yeah.
and I was doing a lot of research on beer styles. I had Michael Jackson's books, I had Fred Eckhart's books. I was reading as much as I could, and honestly, I learned more about different beer styles that were being made around the world in my time at Anheuser-Busch than I learned anywhere else, which I think a lot of people would be surprised at. But that was my job. I had to
Yeah.
understand these things. And our goal was to make sure that we knew how to brew all these styles of beer in case our marketing team ever wanted one of them.
Right. And I think the thing you point out is that you have to really know it because it's your job, and it's your job to be able to explain it to the other people, especially the market department too. Like, hey, I'm doing this Scotch ale. What is it? You can tell the stories and how to brew it, and
Yep.
all those good stuff
Yeah.
about beer. Right. Okay. So when I take a look at this the St. Louis location, I think it is very fascinating the way it is built. And I'm just pull one photo up first, and it is kind of crazy to see it because I've never thought that they're gonna put it in this kind of, I don't know, like German or European type of decoration within the brew house.
Yeah, it goes back to the heritage of Anheuser-Busch. It's a very German company, and the way they did things was very much like the classic German brewers in a lot of ways. The brew
Mhm.
house, St. Louis is a very hot area, and
Mhm.
the brew house was constructed this way that that spot in the middle where the hanging lamp is was
Right.
actually a chimney to allow heat to escape through the middle. So the brewery was built around that rectangular open area, and that area was open for 6 or 7 floors. And what
Uh-huh.
that allowed was for the steam that was produced and the heat that was produced by the brewing process to flow up and out the building, and keep the building manageable from a heat level. The St. Louis brewery had six lauter tons, six kettles, and uh, they were mashing in a brew every 20 minutes in that brew house. So there were the potential of brewing 72 brews in a 24-hour day.
Mhm.
And typically we were trying to hit 60. And if I didn't hit that, I had to explain. And in St. Louis, I ran the brew house. I didn't run the fermenting cellar or the aging
Mhm.
or the finishing cellar. But I
Right.
ran the brew house, and there was essentially 3 brew houses and 6 wort streams in that brew house.
Okay.
So mashing in every 20 minutes. It was it was a monster to manage. It was
Right.
very hard, and it was very fast paced, and you had to keep your eye on things very closely, because if you missed something and they went 24 hours with what you missed, you could
Mhm.
have a whole cellar full of really not right beer. So
Right.
it was a very high pressure operation to try and manage. But you learn how to deal in those kind of environments and make quick decisions, and when to escalate things to your boss and say, "Hey, we got a problem here, and I'm not sure how to fix it," or whatever. It was one where everybody had to work very closely together to make sure that we were doing everything right. The picture on the right on the top, that looks like the kettles
Yeah.
in the brewery, the wort kettles. Now, when I was there, those were copper.
Oh.
And one of the last things that happened when I was running that brew house is we replaced the copper tops with stainless tops, because the copper just wears so fast. And it
Mhm.
was interesting because if you go back to the picture on the left with the chimney, the kettle tops were lifted up that chimney and then lifted down with a huge crane that was 8 stories up in the air.
Oh.
And
Okay.
they dropped them down, and then they had people kind of catching them and then placing them on top of the vessel, and then
Mhm.
they'd attach it. So it was
Okay.
it was quite a production. And then the picture on the right on the bottom that looks like a lagering cellar. So a chip, what we would call a chip cellar at Anheuser-Busch. That's where the Beechwood aging would take place. And all of Anheuser-Busch's lager beers were lagered for 21 to 28 days, depending on the beer.
Wow, that's quite a considerable time for lager. I thought it's going to be a bit shorter, but yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, like I said, it was a very German influenced organization, and a lot of highly skilled German brewmasters were running things at Anheuser-Busch, and the German tradition was a very important part of the brewing process.
Mm-hmm. And 60 brews a day is I just can't imagine. Well, yeah, you went through it, and
yep.
And, you I bet that you learned like a tons of experience, from those 60 a day, which is probably more than maybe one home brewer can do for like 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the last location, the Merrimack, New Hampshire. So I think the time was around 2000. Mitch, again, what swung you to the New England area? And I bet that it is not about the New England IPA at that time.
No, that didn't exist back in 1999, 2000. No, the Merrimack Brewery was going through an expansion. They were adding on a new brew house, and because I had spent some time in the St. Louis Brewery, and the St. Louis Brewery at Anheuser-Busch was looked at as the location where that was the model for every other brewery in the system. So my 2 years there, and helped prepare me for making that transition to Merrimack. The other thing that played a role in that was a lot of the new products that I was working on prior to being in the St. Louis Brewery. A lot of those products were brewed in Merrimack. So I spent a lot of time in Merrimack, New Hampshire in my job in corporate. I would fly up there anytime we made a new beer. We would, we'd monitor it. I got to know the whole team up there. We liked each other. So when they decided to add another person to the team to help manage this expansion project, my name came up and they asked if I wanted to go. And I said, yes, I'd love to go. And the Merrimack Brewery was the smallest Anheuser-Busch brewery. The brews were about the same size as St. Louis, about 400 barrels of brew, but we were only doing, maybe 10 or 12 a day, compared to 60 or 24 in Fort Collins. So, it was a smaller scale brewing operation. And as such, I ran both the brew house and the fermenting cellar at Merrimack. And I did that for 6 years. I really enjoyed New England. I loved the team there. The union brewers were great to work with. They were very engaged and wanted to learn. It was actually a really nice environment to run the operation that I ran, and I really enjoyed it there.
Right, got it. And Mitch, while I was doing this homework for this session, right, one interesting thing about you at Merrimack was that you homebrew again there, and you joined a home brew club too in Merrimack. What happened there? Didn't you have enough brew to do at the day job?
Well, yeah, so one of the things that happened is we went to an event at a brew on premise place, and I met a lot of the home brewers in the area, and we just kind of got along great. And I had been home brewing anyway because I like to brew IPAs and things like that, which I wasn't doing at Anheuser-Busch. And, I enjoyed home brewing and everything about it. So I started going to the club meetings and I made some very good friends in that club. It was called Brew Free or Die. And several of the people in the club went on to have professional brewing careers. So it was a talented group of people, and we were very passionate about beer and brewing, and we really enjoyed it. And so, when I worked, but then, when I was in the club, I could talk about beer and stop and really enjoy it and taste different styles of beer and try brewing different styles of beer and work with other home brewers and brew together. And it was just great fun for me.
Right. And I think it is one of the great way to, leave the day job behind and kind of refresh yourself too.
Yeah, it was very energizing in a lot of ways because, I didn't look at it as the same thing at all, even though it was. I mean, we were brewing beer, but it was a lot more fun. and and we were able to take risks and do things that I obviously wouldn't be able to do at a company like Anheuser-Busch. So it was great fun, and I learned a lot. New hop varieties that would come through and things like that. I got a pretty good handle on hop varieties like Amarillo and Centennial and hops that Anheuser-Busch wasn't using. So that was really good for me as well.
That's cool. That's cool. Let's have a quick look at the Maria Mac location before we move on. And I think that you mentioned the beech wood, right? That you used to add in the lager. So is that the one on the middle top photo?
That is the middle top photo. Those are beechwood chips, we call them, and they're strips of beechwood that have been boiled in baking soda and then boiled in straight water to remove all the oil from them. So they were essentially neutral pieces of wood. They didn't add any flavor to the beer. But what they did is they had large pores on them, and the yeast would collect on the wood, and it would stack up in a tank just like you see there, and the yeast would settle out. And what that did is it allowed the yeast to continue to lager and maturate the beer without having a whole bunch of yeast underneath there. Everything was in contact with the beer.
Got it. And is that like a one-time use wood, or you can keep reusing them? Just curious.
No, it was reused a few times. I want to say it was reused 3 times, and we kept track of that. So we would pull the wood out of the lagering tank, wash it one more time, and then put it back into another tank. And I think we would do that 3 times, if my memory serves. I think it was 3.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking like decades ago, but that's awesome. And just want to throw this quick question here first. Like, do you think that of all this time that you spend at Anheuser-Busch, does they shape you to be a better lager brewer, like brewing a better lager?
Yes, it helped tremendously. And I think just overall, it made me a better brewer because working at Anheuser-Busch not only taught me, it taught me how to run a brewery more than anything. It taught me a lot about sensory. It taught me a lot about brewing different styles of beer. Anheuser-Busch lager brewing processes were a little different than what other people were doing. But, yeast management and fermentation management, that was always kind of the top thing at Anheuser-Busch, was managing fermentations and managing yeast and really keeping a close eye on that. And I think, when I got back into craft, I realized that a lot of people were paying as close attention to fermentations and fermentation management than we were. And I was able to bring some of that to subsequent jobs. So.
Yeah. And so, okay, we are in the second half of the session, and I think it is a good time to sieve your AB story and see how it reflects to your next step in the brewing career. So then you moved to Stone in 2006, and you spent a decade there involved in a lot of project and all the stuff, right? Brewing all the beers. And you moved to Newrium. You managing like 6 kind of breweries at the moment. So the question is, what values were extract from your time at AB and still consider to be the core of your brewing and working fundamentals to this day?
So I think one of the first things that comes to mind is the importance of a sensory panel, and doing good sensory and understanding how your beer tastes in every step along the process. Day 1 of fermentation, day 10 of fermentation, day 20 of fermentation, just knowing what each of your beers as you're brewing often are supposed to taste like. Recognizing problems before they turn into big issues was something else that I learned at Anheuser-Busch. So, if you start to detect an off flavor, what's corrective action you can do to prevent it from becoming a batch of ruined beer, and being able to rescue a beer, I think was really important. Just raw material or ingredient management practices. and making sure that your ingredients are sound quality. I mean, gosh, there's so much that I was able to use. And, when I got to Stone, I think people were really nervous because Stone had a very anti-Anheuser-Busch kind
Uh-huh.
of mindset, and they're like, oh my god, we hired a guy from the enemy, and the thing that I think a lot of people at Stone didn't realize when I was hired is, number one, I loved Stone beers. That's the kind of beer I was making in home brewery, and I love their beers. I was a huge fan of their company, and the last thing I wanted to do was go in there and change their beer. Their beers were great. So and I got everybody on the brewing team together, and I said, look, I know I'm coming in from Anheuser-Busch, but just know that I brew these kind of beers at home. I love these kind of beers. I'm not looking to change any of the beers. What I'm going to try and do is make your lives easier by making the processes better and making them more consistent, and make sure that we have consistent tasting beer. And that was my approach. And I was able to do that to a large extent at Stone. And then also, develop many new beer projects and do some great things. But the lessons I learned at 14 years at Anheuser-Busch are still with me. And it's a lot of problem solving, using sensory to evaluate whether a beer is right, understanding what the data means when you're running a lab, and whether you need to react to it or not. All of that kind of stuff is stuff that was drilled into me at Anheuser-Busch, and I was able to take to both Stone and New Realm.
Yeah, I think, like what you said, is to understand, basically to understand everything to its core and see how you're going to react with the problems, and with the amount of brews that you were facing at that time, with the style of beer that you were brewing at that time or supervising at that time. It is kind of challenging. And the light lager is the place where you have very small room for floors to hide. And if the problem's going to show up, it's going to be kind of obvious, right?
Yeah, and the Century panels went through training every single year, so
Mhm.
they were well trained, and everybody had their. We identified who was strong in identifying certain off flavors and who wasn't,
Mhm.
and so if somebody thought they detected something like diacetyl in
Mhm.
in a lager, in a lager cellar beer at Anheuser-Busch, we'd call in the people that were really good at tasting diacetyl and have them taste it and say, hey, taste this versus this. All these beers taste okay. We wouldn't tell them, but
Mhm.
they knew since they were called, it was probably
Right.
diacetyl. But
Mhm.
and people would taste it, and they'd be able to detect it, and it's like, okay, then we have a problem, and then we could fix it, before it went into a package.
Mhm.
That kind of a skill set is really important, and Anheuser-Busch relied on sensory to evaluate the quality and consistency of their beer to a better level than anybody I've ever worked with.
Right. And that is also the important skills too, right? Even though you have the lab analysis and other stuff, but at the end is how you taste and how you perceive the beer.
Yeah, taste
That
taste always overruled analytics. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, got it. And I think this is the final questions for you, Mitch.
Okay.
So, um, in your opinion, like, how does the brewing of the macro scale lager influence the brewing better beers at Stone and New Realm?
I think the biggest piece there is fermentation management,
Mhm.
and process management in general. Just understanding, making sure everybody understands what's supposed to happen in each process. At Anheuser-Busch, they had a concept that was taken from HACCP, or food safety, and they
Mhm.
adapted that to the brewing process. So they called it, instead of calling it HACCP, they called it critical process control points in the brewing side. And so for every step of the process, there were identified critical process control points. And the thing that we did at Anheuser-Busch is not only identified those and understood those, we also audited them on a regular basis. So we would be out there with a sheet of paper that had all the critical process control points for the brew house operation, for example. And we would once a month spend a day tracking a brew through the brew house and making sure everything was happening the way it was supposed to be. We weren't adding too much water or too little water. We were getting proper flushes in between vessels. We were getting proper drainage out of the vessels. We weren't leaving things behind. The hops were separating properly. You name it. I mean, everything. A brew house audit sheet was 2 pages long, a very, very tight spaced spreadsheet, essentially. And you had to write down everything you saw and whether it was on target or not. And I think that kind of thing is something that craft brewers are starting to do with more frequency, especially the bigger craft brewers. But it's important. It's important, and the thing is, when you have an automated brew house or an automated cellar or something like that, the tendency for brewers is to sit in a control room and watch the screen and just watch and make sure things are happening on the screen. And I'm a big proponent of getting your butt out of the chair and watching the process in the tanks, having a flashlight, looking in the tanks, making sure that when we start sparging a batch in the lauter tun, that it's sparging, it's at the right time, the right level in the tank. We're not sparging too early or too late, and those kind of things. And so the team I work with hears that from me all the time. Get out in the brewery and watch it and audit it and make sure it's happening the same way every single time.
Right. So it's kind of the concept just to make sure that your process very well and just make sure that it is still keep in the top shape as much as possible. That's why you audit it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it helps you discover potential problems before they become catastrophes. If a valve is sticking, for example, and it's not actuating to its full extent or properly or at the proper speed, you could be losing mash or wort down the drain. And if you're in a control room, you're not going to see it. But if you're out there watching the processes, you're going to see it before you lose a whole brew and you can get it fixed.
Got it. Got it. This is very much, I think, very valuable concept to have. I mean, regardless of what job you have, just make sure that you are on top of it. And probably if you have a healthy fear, just make sure that you have plan to counteract with it and overcome those kind of problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the tendency for any brewer is to assume that what you're doing is working properly. And, you never want to assume that. You got to verify it. And verification is very important.
Mm-hmm. All right. Got it, Mitch. So do you have any final says for this topic?
No, I think, the one thing, Anheuser-Busch taught me a lot. It's not a career for everybody because it is, very corporate in a lot of ways. But it is a great place to learn. And there were a lot of opportunities that made themselves available to me in that company, and I'll never regret it. But in my heart, I'm a craft brewer. I want to make craft beer. I want to make beer that's got a lot of flavor. And you can identify the hops in the beer if you taste it. And, and I'm just, I feel very fortunate that I've had the career that I've had because I had 14 great years at Anheuser-Busch, and then I went to Stone and had 10 great years at Stone, and now I'm on year 7 at New Realm. So, still having fun, still making really interesting beers, and that's what it's all about. And, the best thing in the world is when you walk out into your tap room and you see people enjoying your beer. That's why you do it. So.
Yeah, it's always good to see people, smile with the beer that you brew in the glass.
It really is. It's the best.
Yeah. So I think that's the great closing speech. Mitch,
okay.
just wonder one thing, at New Realm, this is off the topic, but if there's any particular interesting or exciting beers that you guys been working on right now that you can share us, just quick one.
Yeah, I think, one of the beers that's doing really well for us right now is called Psychedelic Rabbit IPA, and it uses a thiolized gene-modified yeast strain that releases thiols in malt and hops. And so when you brew with this yeast, about the second day of fermentation, the beer develops this huge passion fruit flavor that is absolutely amazing. So that's been a really fun one for us, because I think we were one of the first breweries in the United States to brew with that yeast on a very regular basis for that beer. And it's been a fun beer for us. So that's been a lot of fun. We do a lager, an American lager. So I got to use some of my knowledge from Anheuser-Busch, but we brew an American lager with the Southern rock band Blackberry Smoke. And so they asked if we'd partner with them to brew a beer for their fans. And their fans, by and large, drink American lager. So we came up with one that's really a beautiful beer, and it's doing very, very well for us as well. So that's, and I'm kind of a rock music guy. So getting to know the folks in the band and seeing them play, and yeah, it's been great. I like them a lot. So it's those are the kind of projects that really make it fun and keep it going. And I've been lucky. We've done a lot of that kind of stuff over the years at both Stone and at New Realm. So it's been great fun.
And that lager is not rock beer, right? Because it had a smoke name in it.
No, and that's the problem with using the band's name on the beer. It doesn't have blackberries in it. It doesn't have smoke in it. It's a straight up American lager, and it's been very confusing. So we're trying to figure out a way on the marketing side to address that and deal with it.
Got it. But it's kind of a fun to think about it too. Like the way we're gonna communicate to customer. Hey, this Blackberry smoke, but it's just straight up American light lager, right?
Yep, American lager, no blackberries, no smoke, and we actually put that on certain signs in the breweries.
Okay, got you. And last one here, just quick one. If there's any particular exciting hops that you fall in love recently?
So I really like the Oregon hop Strata. That's been a fun one to play with. We're brewing a beer on Wednesday that's going to use an experimental hop called 1019, which has a huge peach character and a little bit of coconut. So there's some new ones coming that we're pretty excited about. But my favorites still are Simcoe and Centennial. We use a lot of Citra at New Realm. We used a lot of Centennial at Stone, and I love those hops. But every once in a while, one comes across, and you're like, "Wow, that's really great." We've done some brews with Alani and with Experimental 586 that have been fun as well. So we like to look at new hop varieties for sure.
Gotcha. And any chance that you got to visit New Zealand?
I was in New Zealand about a year ago.
Oh, okay.
I would love to go back. We were there during hop harvest, just coincidentally. It was a family vacation, or my wife and I took a vacation with a group of people that were a bunch of beer people, but we made arrangements to visit Freestyle Hops and Hop Revolution while we were there, which was great fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, Mitch. Yeah, I think we have to end the session now. And
okay.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, thanks for joining the session. It is such a pleasure, and thank you so much for sharing your story about standing on the shoulder of the giant, the experience, and all that. I think this is a joyful session, and we truly appreciate it.
Well, you're quite welcome, and thank you for having me. It's been fun to talk.
Yeah, thank you, and I hope that I'll have a chance to visit New Realm soon in future and probably share a beer with you.
Please let me know.
Sure, will do.
Okay.
Will do.
All right.
Then thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Here you have it. Listen to a story of, like what I mentioned before, a full circle of the experience of a man who's seen the early days of craft beer movement, being involved there as the brewers, and then put himself into the all-in mode to join the large breweries, spend the time there soaking up as much information as he could, learn things along the way, I would say intensely, and wrap all of that up in his own package, and then return to the place where his heart is always belong to, right? Which is the craft brewing world again, and extract all those base things that he could get and move this craft wave scene that he views into the level that he think it's supposed to be. And I think that is one of a concept that kind of important. And if you can just distill it and crystallize it from the stories that Mitch share, I think it is very valuable in my own view, or at least for me. And I hope that you all pick up something from this session as well. So I think that's it for today. The Good Burp session will be back in no time. So stay tuned. And until next time, cheers and swadee krap.